Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And we are excited to have our friend Tony Marolt here back again. Yes, be the light. That what?
Yep, be the light in the darkness. And I think that would be a great thing to start with. This is a really important chapter that sometimes leaders forget because there's just so much going on in their lives and so many responsibilities that they have. So this is the intro to the third chapter, which is be the light in the darkness for others to follow. And the quote is, a candle can guide those who are in the dark. It doesn't have to be large. It just has to give people hope. Candles represent light and also hope. Leaders have to be the light in the darkness, even if you can only directly influence your little corner of the world and not the entire organization.
And let me ask you this for those new listeners out there. I know before we get a recap of everything we discussed last week, just give us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, and then we'll continue.
Sure. I was a naval officer for 9 years, and then I moved into the corporate world, and I did many jobs in the supply chain arena for about the first 16, 17 years of my life in the corporate world. And then I began to implement an ERP, which is an enterprise resource planning tool, which is essentially ripping out all of your old computer systems and replacing them. So I moved into technology for probably the last 8 years in my career. So I've got a strong background in both and a vested interest in leadership from the time I was little in Scouts.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being here again. And I know we're talking about being the light in the darkness as we're just going over, by the way, your book. The title of your book is?
The Leadership Quotient.
Perfect. And I know today we're going to focus on that. Did you want to recap a little bit about what we discussed last week about?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, that would be great. So last week we talked about, I think, three main points I'd like to bring up again. One of the quotes says, you have two choices when you're exposed to heat or the flame. You can either melt or anneal. And that speaks to our ability to just wither under the onslaught that comes at us in every day in life, or we can choose to anneal ourselves. And annealing is the process in the old days where the blacksmiths made iron even stronger into steel through heat and pressure. So that's a really important thing, because if you can't, you have to have some way, whether it's through your faith, whether it's through your interest in all kinds of technical things, or fiction or nonfiction, or your interest in people. You've got to find ways to find a support system for yourself, both internally and externally. The second thing we talked about is there are a lot of things throughout this book and leadership in general, a lot of tools that I'm exposing, because that's the difference here I'm trying to bring across is practical tools. And I talk about in order to become proficient, or even just decide, is this the right tool for me? Because I guarantee you, every tool in the book is not going to fit you personally. So you have to treat it like a closet where you pull out a leadership skill, try it on, and put it through its paces. And if you don't like, either return a store or return a closet. But you have to be able to try things on. And if it feels good for you and you practice it, then put it on and wear it. If permanently, or if it doesn't, again, put it back in the closet. And then we talked extensively about firefighting from my experiences in the Navy, where I made connections to the different kinds of leadership basics, from fundamental skills like just being able to talk to folks, being able to learn, all the way up to you're in a large organization. How do you navigate things like politics, or how do you do things like strategy? So those are all different kinds of firefighting tools or leadership skills. So that's what we kind of covered last time.
Got it. Well, thank you. I like that terminology, like you said, to try on those leadership behaviors from your closet. Not everybody has a good closet to choose from, though. That's why we need the man like yourself to guide us. All right. So,
That's a
chapter
great analogy. Yeah.
three of the leadership quotient is be the light in the darkness for others to follow. Did you want
Right.
to share anything else with chapter three? And,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
can we definitely
Yeah.
want to go over that quote and expand it?
Yeah. So one of the things in the quote I read about being a candle, a couple of points. One is a candle. You don't want to be the kind of candle that gives out so much heat that nobody will approach you. You want to be the light part of the candle. And the other part that I learned over time when I was young and dumb coming into the corporate world from the military, I thought that I could change significant parts of the company. And the reality is I couldn't. And so eventually I focused on my little corner of the world because that's what I could control. So whether it was my team or my partners within the department, my peers, that's the little corner of the world that I could control. I could influence the corporation, but you're really kind of nipping around the edges. So it's
True.
much more difficult to do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And as far as the quote itself, you say, the day you fail to encourage the hearts of those around you and thank them for what they do is the day you cease to be a leader.
Yes. And
wow.
That's a powerful statement. It can be a provocative statement, but for me, it has to be the reality. And I think, several weeks ago, we talked about in official academia, leadership is defined on two continuums. One is which are you getting the job done, your ability to get the work done, to complete the task. And the other is your concern for people. And too often, leaders forget about the people. A supervisor, for instance, in a call center is always concerned about, okay, how many calls do we have? Let's reduce the wait time, things, metric kinds of things. That's all well and good, but they also have to be able to get those people motivated because being in a call center all day isn't everyone's idea of fun. So you have to find ways to reach into those individuals and encourage their hearts. Quite often that can be done as simply as a thank you. If I'll give you an example. There was a computer programmer who had worked for Hallmark for probably 30 years. And one of my team went up to him and gave him a gift. They knew he was diabetic, so they gave him something that was low sugar. And he said, and they thanked him for the work he had done for her. And he said, this is the first time in 30 years that anyone has thanked me for anything.
Wow.
And that is just sad. But if you were to poll people and just ask them today, when was the last time someone thanked you for what you've done? You might be surprised at the response as to how long it has been. With the world being even more connected, you would think there would be a greater chance of people thanking each other, but often it's not because the electronics just allow us to move even faster and faster, right? And so we don't, and then throw in COVID where you don't have people meeting in offices, but meeting online. Well, it's really hard for someone to pay a compliment to someone with 5 other people on the line, right? So
little thank you goes a long way. I mean, it's as simple as the basics you learn as a child, right? I have a 5 and 7-year-old, so it comes down to basics. And believe it or not, smile, hold the door for someone, a little kindness, a little gratitude. It does go a super long way, and there's a lot to be said for that.
Exactly.
Tony, just by the way, would you mind sharing your website? I don't know if we established that off the top.
It's Lead Left, Grow Right, all one word, leadleftgrowright.com.
Perfect. All right. So let's talk about now what's Encourage the Heart. That's another book.
Yes. Encourage the Heart is another book. Actually, one of the greatest leaders I worked for, her name was Margaret Keating at Hallmark. She gave that book out to everyone. in her organization because she was so impressed. So all leadership from supervisory level on up were given the book, and
Wow.
I just found it fascinating because it's a great resource book, and it's also a great book to get you to think of other ways of communicating, of being that light in the darkness for folks. So, for instance, one of the things is telling stories, and not every one of us is a great storyteller, but the stories that she talks about might be in a ceremonial form. So one of the things I did was it was getting to be November timeframe, and both the IT folks on our team as well as my own team and procurement systems, they had been working just super hard on a project, and we were on pace and doing well. And I had read this book in the summer, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try and develop a ceremony. So I thought and thought, and what I did was I went to the grocery store, I bought Cornish game hens, and I got one for everyone, and I put them in a big plastic bag that morning, put them away, and then we had our meeting. And in that meeting, which was really just a quick thank you meeting, I created this huge story about the tribes of IT and the tribes of procurement and how they came together one day, and they gave each other gifts, and that was the first handing of the hens. And so at that point, I gave each one, and it was just, it's like at that point, it was like a $3 item, but they liked the ceremony and they appreciated the recognition for their own individual work as well as what the team had done.
Amazing. And by the way, I encourage the hearts. Where can we find the book? The author is?
It just escaped me and I forgot to bring it down. I apologize.
It's all right. I could Google it. That's fine. I'm sure we can too.
Yeah. But you can find it out on Amazon or any of the normal places for books.
Good. Now, I know you talk about really being the conscience of your team, as you say, and being really crucible for others. So why would you say these characteristics are super important to being the light in the darkness as a leader?
So there's a couple of different things. One, the crucible, it's a vessel essentially that can hold two different kinds of chemicals or solutions, and it holds them safely. It will not it will not interact with them, but it allows them to interact with each other successfully. And I think of the crucible with people as being there to, if you think of maybe cupped hands would be a good analogy for a crucible, but sometimes you just need to hold people that may be in opposition to each other or just struggling with conflict about how to solve a problem. Sometimes you just have to hold them in your hands or treat the situation lightly and let them work it out for themselves, guide them if necessary, but you don't want to insert yourself all of the time into those situations because so many of us are programmed with, well, I got to solve the problem. And I know women feel men are that way.
Yes.
I got to solve your problem, right? And women are like, no, just listen to me. I don't need to have my problem solved. That's not what I'm asking. So in the workplace, sometimes that same thing is true where people aren't listening to each other. So being a crucible is one way to do that.
Got it. Interesting. Good to know. Also, there's 5 lenses you say about conscious to view information from. Do you want to talk about that and the integrity link a little bit to conscious in general?
Yes. So I talked a few weeks ago about being the conscience of your team. I had a couple of people that told me, Tony, you're the conscience of our team. And I had 2 thoughts that ran through my mind at the same time. One is, oh my gosh, if I'm the conscience of the team, we're really in trouble. And 2 was, if I really am the conscience of the team, that means that people think I have some integrity, then that's a significant responsibility, not really a burden, but a significant responsibility for me to keep my integrity intact, ask the hard questions, because that's what's appreciated on both sides. And that helps guide things if you're the conscience of the team. So when you're the conscience of the team, there are several lenses that you have to be aware of and you have to work through. One is the politics that exist. And so many of us think that, and I did early in my career, politics is just, I don't want to play the corporate gamesmanship in politics. But really, politics is neither good nor bad. It just is. It's how companies work. It's how people can influence each other and influence people higher up to approve projects, disapprove projects, etc. So if you think about politics as neither good nor bad, that allows you to be the conscience of the team. You have to recognize them. And when you say play politics, in my mind, a part of that is not the negative connotation with playing politics. It's you work so that to try and bring sides together, to try and get a successful outcome without damaging anyone in the process. That's the key part. Another lens would be, you got to think about what are the short-term and long-term implications. Too often in corporate America anyway, but in organizations in general, people are making decisions for the short term. Well, we got to do this. Everyone's reacting to something that's out there. Doesn't matter if it's our federal government or your state government or the board in your corporation or just your department manager or senior manager. They react quite often from pressures that are put upon them and make short-term decision making. So if you're the conscience, you have to be able to distinguish between, okay, is this something that's really important and we need to die on the hill for because it has long-term impacts? And if so, then you have to argue for taking a wider view, a more interconnected view, and not just making a short-term point decision that helps for now, but it's going to hurt you later. A third element is what do you have to have when it concerns people on the teams? And again, that's that concern for people access, the grow part, as I call it. You can either you have to focus as a great leader on go and grow. And so you have to take the people into account. And if you yourself are not especially perceptive, you can certainly increase that skill, but there are others on your team who may have a much higher EQ, the emotional quotient, than you. So leverage those people to find out, okay, what are people talking about? What are they concerned about? What solutions might they have? So that, I think, is the third element. The fourth element is technology. You always have to consider in today's world, there's almost always a technical impact to every business decision that you make. So you have to be able to take a look at those technical considerations. And again, with a short and long-term impact and people impact, leverage technicalities into the discussion. And the last one I think is very important. And you can go out on the internet, and there's I think it's Harvard that might have it's a bias assessment. You have to understand your own biases, and you have to understand the biases of others if you're going to be the conscience of that team, because you have to be able to guide people and yourself both against the bias or for the bias, depending on how the situation works. Because all of that plays into decision-making, people's biases up front.
Got it. And you say as a leader, there are many times when you need to hold confidence or, of course, to bring others together in this heated and emotional moment. So being crucible, you say, it's great leaders know when to step in, when to step out, preferably more of the latter. But I find a lot of times people I know that are leaders, they don't step out.
No.
That's a hard thing. What is it about the mind? What are they? What's happening there?
Well, I think part of that is people like
is it
people
ego?
like to be. Sometimes, absolutely, it's ego, because they are driven by, in their mind, how many problems they solve. So if they could check the box today and say, well, I solved 7 problems. Well, they may have think they solved 7 problems or made 7 decisions, but they don't know what the impact has been to people along the way. Whereas if they would have step back, they would have let people find their own way and find perhaps even better solutions. And so um, it goes into certainly that concern for people, but they're driven more by concern for getting something done. And getting something done in their mind, that's a little notch in their belt. That's how they think they're making themselves look good to others. And so they step in because they want to go back and report to the boss, hey, we were doing this, but I hadn't, I hadn't clogged the logjam. Well, that might look good to the boss, but not if things are getting done or getting done with all kinds of wreckage left in the wake. And a huge part of that, to your question, in addition to ego, is people's ability to let control go. That doesn't mean you let your authority go, but let your control go. I think I mentioned this, but if not, I'll mention it now. A great exercise to see how much control you have personally, or perhaps a peer of yours or a friend, is to go to a restaurant and say, okay, we're going to do something different today. I want you to order all of my meal, including the drink, from this menu in front of us, and I'm going to do the same for you. And you watch how people respond, because most people, that really gets them leery about, okay, you can see the anxiety building up because they know they're going to have a loss of control. But if you do that exercise, it helps you see, oh my gosh, I do have a need for a lot of control. I wanted to give them every parameter under the sun. So again, control is a huge, huge part of why people feel that they have to step in. So it's ego, it's politics, and it's control are primary drivers, I would say.
Got it. Well, thank you for clarifying that. So we got to work on that with some people. All right. And as a leader, you say you outline, how oftentimes people are coal or diamonds, right? That lie underground in a sense, waiting
Yes.
for that great leader to bring them up to the surface, and
Yep.
how to identify them and to make that happen. If you could explain a little. Thank you.
Yep. So lying underground can be a lot of different things. Clearly, it's not physically being under the ground, but I just saw a little snippet on the news. Tim Scott, who's one of our senators from South Carolina, he grew up in the projects. He grew up with a single mother, and he rose to become a state senator. So somewhere along the line, he had to find that intestinal fortitude, but someone else also had to help mentor Senator Scott along in order for him to become what he has become today and achieved. So it's finding a diamond that may be right out there in the open, or more often it's finding things that aren't. You have to dig a lot deeper if you're trying to find out people that might be a lump of coal, and they just need the right pressure. I say pressure, but pressure in the sense that they might need a realistic talking to. So for instance, in a drug intervention, that's a very difficult thing to do, especially for someone in your family. But you have to be able to do those kinds of things to step in and mold them and influence them so that they can become a diamond in an addict situation to become clean permanently. In the corporate world, too often there's a lot of people that have started out in a corporation and they thought that everything was great and they really liked their job and the people they work with, but they get bashed over the head too often. Most often it's verbally and mentally by either peers or managers who just don't realize what they're doing. And eventually that person who had all kinds of great ideas, could have been a good problem solver, maybe had other skills that you didn't even know about that you could have leveraged, they fade into the background and they just do their job. How many people are accused of, well, I'm just doing my job, that's not my job, or that's above my, or that's
That's above my pay grade. Yes.
I hate that.
I
one,
hate that too.
oh my gosh, it's like, no, it's in your pay grade.
Yes.
All of us are trying to make this organization successful, right? So if everyone's trying to make this successful, that doesn't mean, it does mean doing your job well, but it also means doing what's best for the organization or for the team or fill in the blanks. So.
Got it. Well, thank you. And we still have just a few minutes left to share. Did you want to elaborate on that? Discuss a little bit about what we have in store for next week. It's your show, Tony. So
yeah, let's talk about. So for next week, again, this week focused on being the light in the darkness, and it's a pretty long chapter because it's really important, and I give you lots of other examples besides the ones I've used. As we go into next week, we're going to focus on a couple of chapters, and the focus is going to be on the future and on others. So what can you do to influence and bring people into the future and come along with you on your journey? What can you do to influence others? And then the chapter 5, I wrote because of everything that had been going on at the time and still goes on to this day, quite frankly, about news, fake news, who's lying, who's not, who's shading the truth. And so that book's about fact or fiction. And I guess the tease for that, I'm just going to say, what is 2 plus 2? And just leave it there. And we can talk about that next time and what that has to do with fact or fiction.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm loving it, loving it, loving it. So if we want to contact you, reach out for your help and your guidance, also for your books, tell us how we could do so.
So leadleftgrowright.com, or you can email me personally at tony.marolt, Marolt, tony.marolt@gmail.com, or feel free to call or text me at 816-694-4656. And I would love to hear feedback from folks.
Right.
I haven't gotten a lot so far, so I would love to have some feedback because that makes these podcasts better. It makes me better as a leader. So I welcome any and all feedback, negative or positive. I'm a big boy. I can take either.
Perfect. And next week, we're focusing on chapter 4, 5, focus on the future and others, correct?
Correct. And fact or fiction.
2 plus 2 equals 4. Does it really? We'll find out next week.
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony, for being here, for joining us. And again, please reach out to Tony. Exciting to have him again. It's tony.marolt@gmail.com. He gave you his personal email there. How kind of him. And leadleftgrowright.com. And looking forward to next week. You have a great day.
You too, Jill. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And to all of our listeners as well, stay tuned. More of the show is on the way.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.